Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Module 1 on School Safety Planning and Implementation in the context of systemic risk and in accordance with the commitments of the 2030 Agenda. And welcome more particularly to Module 1.2, entitled School Safety as a Key Element of the 2030 Agenda. Our agenda for Module 1.2 is quite straightforward, as I will actually introduce to you a set of key documents and key global agendas, and I will each time show you the link with school safety to show you how school safety is really a key element of the 2030 Agenda. So I will start the module by introducing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then I will introduce the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Then I will introduce the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, then the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and I will finally introduce the Paris Agreement. So let's start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is a milestone document in the history of human rights. It was drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world and was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10 December 1948 as a common standard of achievement for all people and all nations. And the most important to say here is the fact that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the first document in which we set out that fundamental human rights have to be universally protected. And since its adoption, we have to say that this document has been translated into over more than 500 languages. So why starting this module by introducing the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and what is this link with school safety? Well, actually, we can see the link through Article 26, which is the one on the right to education. Actually, what Article 26 says the following. 1. Everyone has the right to education. Education should be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education should be compulsory. Technical and professional education should be made generally available, and higher education should be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Second, education should be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It should promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and should further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Third, parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that should be given to their children. So because the School Safety Agenda is derived on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, notably on the right to education, we could not start this module by not introducing this Article 26 coming from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So education is of course key because it provides skills that people need to reach their full potential and to exercise their other rights, such as the right to life and health. But disasters and conflict may create some instability when they occur, and the result of this instability is often the limitation or denial to a group of people the basic human rights established in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so what it means for children is that out of school, children may be exposed to an increased risk of abuse and children's rights violations. So consideration for human rights and the well-being of the children should be the top priority in the formulation of any strategy and action plan on school safety. Now let's reach out to the second main document I would like to introduce you today through this module 1.2, which is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child was adopted about 30 years ago and is an international agreement on childhood, which is today the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history and which has definitely helped transform children's lives around the world. So we have to mention that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child includes 54 articles that apply to all children independent of their ethnicity, gender, language, religion, national or social origin, or other status, and cover children's rights from the civil, political, economic, cultural, and social point of view. And actually the most important for us today is to see that the urgency to protect children from the impact of natural hazards and climate change is rooted in the articles of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. And actually here you have the list of the concerned articles. So for instance, we have Article 3 related to best interest that say that the best interest of the child should be a primary consideration in all actions that affect children. Then we have Article 4 on the implementation of the Convention, saying that parties must do all they can to ensure every child can enjoy his or her rights by creating systems and passing laws that promote and protect children's rights. Then we have Article 6 on the right to life, saying that children have the right to live a full life. Parties should ensure that children survive and develop healthily. Then Article 24, related to right to the best possible health, saying that parties must provide children with good quality health care, clean water, nutritious food, a clean environment, and education on health and well-being so that children can stay healthy. Then Article 28 on the right to education, which says that primary education must be free and different forms of secondary education must be available to every child. Discipline in schools must respect children's dignity and their rights. And finally, Article 31, which is related to the right to play, and which say that children have the right to relax, play, and to join in a wide range of leisure activities. Now that you better see the link between school safety and the Convention on the Right of the Child, we can now move on and continue with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by all United Nations member states in 2015. And at the heart of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, better known as SDGs. And these SDGs are an urgent call for action by all countries, whether developed or developing, in a global partnership. They actually recognize that ending poverty and other deprivations must go hand in hand with strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and forests. So why are we mentioning now why the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is of interest when we are considering school safety? Well, first, because the Article 25 of the agenda is directly addressing school safety, and says the following: we will strive to provide children and youth with a nurturing environment for the full realization of their rights and capabilities, helping our countries to reap the demographic dividend, including through safe schools and cohesive communities and families. Furthermore, we have the 17 SDGs, and we have indeed the SDG 4, which is completely dedicated to quality education, and so we can see the link with school safety quite obviously. But we have also other SDGs that are of our interest, and because linked also with school safety related issues, such as, for instance, SDG 11 on making cities more resilient, and also SDG 16, which aims at promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, providing access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So we are going to show the link between these three SDGs with school safety now. So first, let's start with SDG 4. SDG 4 is the one which is the most obviously linked to school safety. Why? Because it's directly focusing on ensuring quality education. The goal number 4, SDG number 4, actually has 10 targets, and there are 2 of them that can be of our interest in our module today when considering school safety. First, we have the target 4.7 that says that by 2030 we need to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship and appreciation of cultural diversity, and of culture's contributions to sustainable development. And there is also target 4.A, which is of our interest, which says that we need to build and upgrade education facilities that are child, disability, and gender sensitive, and that provide safe, non-violent, inclusive, and effective learning environment for all. Now, having said that, I would just like to make a short but important aside to introduce the Incheon Declaration and Framework for Action that was adopted on 21st May 2015 at the World Education Forum held in Incheon, Republic of Korea, just to show you that SDG 4 must be seen within this broader context of development today. So actually, the Incheon Declaration constitutes the commitment of the education community for Education 2030 and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and which recognizes the important role of education as a main driver of development. And actually, within the Incheon Declaration, there are two main points, point 26 and point 57, that I would like to read to you to show you also how the Incheon Declaration addresses this item of school safety. So point 26 addresses the item as follows. The capacity of governments and civil society for disaster risk reduction, peace education, climate change adaptation, and emergency preparedness and response should be strengthened at all levels to ensure that risk is mitigated and education maintained during all phases from emergency response to recovery. Well-coordinated national, regional, and global responses and systems are needed to prepare for and respond to emergencies and to build back better towards safer and more equitable education systems. Now, point 57 says the following: we need to ensure that education policies, sector plans, and budget planning include risk assessment, preparedness, and response to emergency situations for education, and initiatives that respond to the education needs of children, youth, and adults affected by disaster, conflict, displacement, and epidemic, including IDP and refugees. And also later says that we need to support a comprehensive approach to making schools resilient to disaster impact of all sizes, and this includes safer school facilities, school disaster management, and risk reduction and resilience education. And this directly refers to the comprehensive school safety framework that will be introduced to you later on in this MOOC. So as you can see in the Incheon Declaration, there is a clear link through the different points with school safety related issues. Now let's continue with SDG 11 to demonstrate the same, that also SDG 11, which aims to make cities and human settlements sure, inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. There are actually some links with school safety when we look at the targets of SDG 11, and more particularly when we look at target 11.2, saying that we need to improve road safety, notably by expanding public transport with special attention to the needs of those in vulnerable situations, women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. But also through the target number 5, saying that we need to significantly reduce the number of deaths and the number of people affected caused by disasters, including water-related disasters, with a focus on protecting the poor and people in vulnerable situations. So here, let me introduce the new urban agenda, which has clearly linked with SDG 11 and also then with school safety. This new urban agenda was adopted at the United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development in Quito in 2016, and this agenda really represents a shared vision for a better and more sustainable future, and ensure that if well planned and well managed, urbanization can be a powerful tool for sustainable development for both developing and developed countries. And again, if we look at in details at the new urban agenda, we can see a set of articles that somehow are related to school safety or actually address some school safety related issues. So for instance, we have Article 17 saying that we need to provide equal access for all to public goods and quality services, including education. Then we have Article 32 stressing the need to promote the development of integrated and age and gender responsive housing policies and approaches across all sectors, including education. And finally, we have Article 36, stressing the need to promote appropriate measures in cities and human settlements that facilitate access for persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others to the physical environments of cities and in particular to education facilities. So again, you can see through this agenda the link to school safety related issues. And the last SDG, that is related, that can be related somehow with school safety related issues is SDG number 16, which aims to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. So again, if we look at the targets of SDG 16, we can see that some of them are somehow can address the issue of safe schools. So for instance, you have all the targets that can be considered as having a link with school safety and somehow. And so for instance, we have target 16.1 that say that we need to significantly reduce all forms of violence and related death rates everywhere, or target 16.2 that say that we need to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture on children. 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, I just wanted to share with you this spider diagram where you have all the 17 SDGs and where we can see that disaster risk management is really at the core of development, and by working on policies and so on related to disaster risk management, we can address issues raised by each of the SDGs. Now let's move on and reach out to the next global agenda, which is the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. Actually, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction is the most recent one of a quite long series of disasters agenda that actually started in 1971 with the United Nations Disaster Relief Coordinator. Then we had in 1990 the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction. And then in 1994, the Yokohama Strategy and Plan for Action for a Safer World. Then in 1999, the International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction. In 2005, the Yogo Framework for Action. And finally, in 2015, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. And actually, through this timeline, you can also see that the concept evolved over the years, because you may see it only since 1999 and the International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction that we stopped talking about natural disaster, which actually we now know that they do not exist because disasters are social constructions. But since then, we've been talking about natural hazards or in actually different types of hazards, such as technological hazards, biological hazards, which shows the evolution of the terminology. So just to go back to the Sendai Framework, the Sendai Framework is the most recent disaster agenda that was adopted in 2015, and the aim of the Sendai Framework is to achieve the substantial reduction of disaster risk and losses in lives, livelihood, and health, and in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, communities, and countries over the next 15 years. The Sendai Framework has four main priorities. Priority number 1 is on understanding disaster risk. Priority 2 is on strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. And priority number 3 is on investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. And priority number 4 is on enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. The Sendai Framework has 4 main priorities, but has also 7 targets. Indeed, the Sendai Framework has 7 targets that have been developed in order to support the assessment of global progress in achieving the outcome and goal of the Sendai Framework. And these targets are to be measured at the global level. So here you can see the 7 targets, and then on the right you have the related global target for the education sector. And so if we take the example of global target D, which is focusing on substantially reducing disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services, among them health and educational facilities, including through developing their resilience by 2030, you can see the different indicators for this target that enable to measure the progress made by country in relation to this target in particular. So finally, let's now introduce the Paris Agreement, which is the last main document, global agenda, I would like to introduce to you today through this module. The Paris Agreement is the legally binding international treaty on climate change that was adopted by 196 parties at COP21 in Paris in 2015. The goal of the Paris Agreement is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And the Paris Agreement is quite a major achievement because it was the first time that a binding agreement bringing all nations into a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effect was adopted. So as for the other global agendas that were introduced to you earlier, we can see through the Paris Agreement that concerns related to school safety have been also raised within the context of climate change mitigation and adaptation. And on this slide, you have the articles that are of particularly relevance on this item. Right, so just before finishing, I just would like to introduce you to the concept of action for climate empowerment, which is a term that was adopted by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to did not work under Article 6 of the Convention, but that was also used in Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. And this term actually mentioned that we have to empower all members of society to engage in climate action, including children and young people. And so we need to promote youth engagement. And now we can see all over the world that there are several young engagement initiatives, and we need to support them and to multiply them even more. So as a conclusion, I would like to share with you this slide, which is a sort of a summary diagram where you have the four most recent global agenda: the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Paris Agreement, and the New Urban Agenda. And what I wanted to share with you is perhaps a bit pushed by the COVID-19 situation. Now there is a consensus on the fact that we need to have a systemic risk lens when addressing risk-related issues in order to have a more holistic approach and ensure that an event such as COVID-19 that had so many impacts on all the sectors of our societies and mainly on education, in the future we might be better able to tackle this kind of threat in a systemic manner, and in order to have a risk-informed sustainable development in the future. So on this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. I wish you a good continuation of the MOOC.